All right, greetings. Thanks everyone for joining. It's May 4th, one of the most polite dates, 2023. And we will check in to whatever extent is relevant with the Systems Community Alliance and the ISSS archival works. We can return to some of the ongoing discussions about the language models and how to use them, especially at ISSS. And then first we can begin though with Peter describing and or Tom describing what is the status and intention of these of the current systems modeling. What can you say about it?
Yeah, well, Tom should sort of tell the story, but just for the context, and Tom will tell you about his work. Gary Smith and I talked about this, I think probably last year at some length, about the limitations of it being a one-man model. And it now displayed on the front page of ISSS.org, and I have from time to time worked with Tom to update it, and it's all sitting on the hosted service at a2hosting.com. And that is where it is stored, and it is displayed off the front page of ISSS in the World of Systems box. And we want to ensure that ISSS has some continuity of access and creativity or capability to develop the model in some software to be determined. So with that, Tom, please tell this group what you've been up to over the many years, why, and what system you're using, and the challenges to get it into other modeling languages.
Okay. When I started studying systems seriously, I started keeping notes of books I read or ideas I came across, and they were basically fragmented. They were in different files. And having been a modeler for quite a few years in my day job, I envisioned a single model that captured everything and was very adaptable, had no redundancy, one and only one place for every piece of knowledge that you could easily find, so you didn't have to repeat anything. And I developed a model to do that. My real focus is on the universe in a system-oriented perspective. But to do that, I need all the information about what has been developed. So Systems Commons is a simpler model just to get started. But it is, I guess I've been using it for more than 10 years. And I typically have it up all the time when I'm working and capture something almost every day. So it has quite a bit in it now. The one that's available on the ISSS website is more than a year old. And I was going to ask Peter if he's still able to update that. I can send him an updated copy, which has quite a bit more in than the one that's there now. So I can do that, but it's a simpler one where I focused on facts that are not controversial. So I have a class model where I have types. It's sort of like a database schema, which are things like people, documents, websites, quotations, that type of thing. And it's in UML, which is standard software development language, industry standard. And it's a pretty powerful modeling tool that's rather expensive. So there could be an issue on the cost, which we have talked about, and I understand that. But it can be exported in a standard UML format that other less expensive modeling tools can use. So I'm fine with doing that. And actually with Bruce McNaughton, we tested that out a year or so ago. We were able to do it with a small model. So
What's the software you use again? Is it relational or something?
no, it's IBM Rational
Oh, that's right.
RASD or whatever. I worked with that in my day job, and so when I left, I continued to purchase a copy of it. Because I had so much experience with it, I know how to use it very well. And it's a pretty good tool. But I can understand why everyone wouldn't want to have it because of the cost. And I think it can be done with cheaper, less expensive tools. And I'm fine with making a copy available. I think it's certainly far from perfect at this point, but it does have a lot of information in it that I think would be very helpful. And it can be developed quite a bit further, which I do periodically. So if you're able to still put up a version, I can send you a latest version.
Yeah,
I can also send you, in effect, the source code
do both. Yeah.
just as a backup, and it could be, if I'm not available, it could be used by somebody, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, I think, yeah, please do both, today, tomorrow, as soon as possible, and I'll update that. And I do think we talked to Gary about another modeling software, and we probably should see if he could join us on these calls, on at least on knowledge engineering. So we should reach out to Gary on that and encourage him to come and talk about this, because he does use modeling software. I forget what he uses. And indeed, if you've been working with Bruce as well, then we should have them both come and just share with them, because you've done an incredible amount of work on that, and it should be at least a part of the this knowledge engineering discussion, as in a sense you've done a form of knowledge engineering in the way that model is presented and created and presented.
Yeah, we also talked about it becoming a ISSS model rather than my model, and other people being able to update it. Now, there has to be some coordination. People could be supplying suggested updates to some central person that actually changes the model. It's difficult to organize multiple people changing the same model and coordinating it. But
Absolutely. Yeah,
that's an issue we talked about also.
But this group has got a new energy around it with Daniel's leadership and this documentation that he's doing on Coda. And it makes sense to revisit this and try and formalize something along those lines. Yeah.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is the export may natively be readable by language models. So even a static export may already contribute largely to different kinds of ongoing efforts. That seems like the low bar is very accessible, because structured text inputs, including like XML, UML, etc., those are readable by language models. Then if there is a way to understand how to go from even just a sample export, and I mean, what does bring you into, what other program is it even brought into? Is it brought into like a simulation programming language modeling suite or mind maps? What is the functionality that it has, or that you think like a free or open source rendition would have?
The functionality. Well, exporting it just puts it into a standard UML format that any other UML tool can access. So anyone that has a UML tool could then access it. The version that's on the website is one that's converted to what's the standard web language display,
HTML. Hmm.
so that any browser can look at it but can't change it.
Right.
Now, UML does have a simulation capability, but I don't use that. And it has a conversion, uses a different term, capability also, so that you could, for example, we talk about the fragmentation of different disciplines. You could have a chemistry language, you could have a physics language, you could have a biology language. You could convert them all into a standard language. Now, of course, you'd have to write the conversions, which would be some issue, the mapping between them. But it is possible to do. Now, I've not done any of that. But there are some capabilities that could be very helpful in the longer term. But did I answer the question about functionality?
What do you believe people would want to use it for and find valuable in using it?
Just finding information and continuing to update it so that it becomes a standard source of information. So, for example, I probably have hundreds of people. And in most cases, the people are only consist of a name, a birth date, a death date, if it's applicable, and maybe a brief sentence or two from Wikipedia or some other source about who they are. And a link, the model has links to the web. So in most cases, if they have a Wikipedia entry, there's a link to their Wikipedia entry, which of course can give you much more information. So as often happens to me, you run across the name of somebody that you're not familiar with. First thing you do is look it up and find out a thumbnail sketch of this person, know who they are and where they fit in. So you can do that very easily with the model. And of course, there's other information on organizations. Possibly the most valuable is quotations. I've been a long time capturer of quotations that express some nugget of wisdom very well. Probably have several hundred of them. And they're organized to some degree by subject. I don't know if, again, if I'm answering your question or just talking here.
No, I
if I
think you've
could
answered
jump-
it. Can I jump in?
Yep.
This is, he's been addressing the archive organization challenge, which is, I think, the connecting to simulation and domain ontologies and things like that is a I won't say trivial, but it's trivial problem compared to organizing the whole, the structure of the whole. Those
Yes.
things can be addressed. As long as it's done systematically, then those things can be addressed at any point. The archival challenge of organizing the whole is, I see, what he's contributed so much to. And the challenge is taking his synthesis and building on it, as he said, making it so that people don't keep starting from scratch. Now, Tom, have you integrated like Francois' work and Len's work and other efforts at synthesis?
To some degree, yes.
Okay.
I have references.
But that would be the goal. I see that as the goal, is to is to combine this with
Truth drop,
I think we lost her.
as
Yeah.
always. But let me ask this. We've had many system scientists, some of whom are, oh, Janet will continue. Janet, you can continue.
Yeah, okay. So that there is so that we build, as we were talking about, as you said last time, Daniel, everything becomes custom, and then it's so hard to for people to build on each other's work. Now that this has a critical mass that he has brought together, that we can maybe there's an issue with collecting other efforts like Charles Francois' work and Len's work, and other attempts at this kind of archiving, and then figure out if how to integrate them. I just happened to come from, we were listening to a talk from the Topos Institute on archival efforts in mathematics and how that influenced the development of category theory. And the challenges, there still are ongoing challenges in organizing the work within mathematics, which is narrower than within systems. So the coming up with an archiving approach, and then doing enough so that you get a critical mass, and then getting enough, finding ways to make it accessible, and etc. Is just hugely valuable by itself.
Yes, thanks.
I will
Yeah,
just note that I
Mhm.
have a lot of basic information, as I mentioned, like documents and people, organizations. I'm gradually developing more organization, and there's a lot of flexibility in how that it's organized. So for example, I have disciplines, and I have references in there to things that fall into the traditional disciplines. Then I have a separate themes, issues that come up over and over again, and knowledge management is one of them. And they're developed sort of secondary or tertiary. There's room for other, because it's one of my basic principles is to keep it adaptable, so it's relatively easy to change. So it can be adapted. So it goes from very prosaic things like names and birth dates to more towards ideas and how things fit together. So my idea from the very beginning is it's a long-term thing that needs to be developed over time, and keeping it flexible so it can be developed as we understand better where we want to go.
Yeah, well, it makes sense. I mean, we should approach it in a system scientific way, with our system of interest being an adaptive knowledge management system. And then it sounds like assessing these archives, and first just surveying and securing, so that we don't have unforced losses. Then proceed with kind of more of a syntactic integration, like, is there alignment of people or terms, just, and then proceed further, while also improving documentation, making sure that there's always like a credible exit into a plain text open source format, so that even the representation and the interface can be changed. And then just there are many other aspects to it, but I mean, are these broadly the pieces that we should be considering? Rob?
Yes, I just wanted to stress the rigor and evidence-based value that Tom's work brings. Tom is also active in another ISSS group, the Holism SIG, and we have various discussions around key topics. And time and time again, what Tom brings is, for example, when we were discussing the term system or dimension, he would come back with all the quotes and the source references as evidence to keep us grounded in our discussions. And I think that's what we as a discipline need, is that evidence-based grounding and ontology in our work, of which a structured ontology provides, and Tom's work provides. So it's a reminder about how we should actually operate, as well as investigators, as system scientists, in the work that we do as well.
I'd be happy to do a presentation at one of our later sessions if you think that would be helpful. Give you a better idea of what it is I have.
Okay.
I think, Tom, you did a presentation to the ISSS, which is probably recorded, and also other people subsequently developed additional work based on, for instance, your categorization of the term systems. So there is that available as well.
Right.
Well, it sounds like in the shortest of terms that providing Peter with the updated version and materials, I guess either for updating what is on the site, but at least just to snapshot this current version, improve the documentation around the use of this, including which free tools can use it. And then it kind of feeds into the bigger questions about archiving, indexing, using ISSS organizational and like people's contributions. Because multiple people have knowledge corpuses to contribute. So I feel like the low bar on that in terms of knowledge engineering is, again, just to archive and snapshot. Then we can go further into the FAIR data principles: findable, accessible, indexable, reusable, and then continue on with making it part of educational materials and, you know, integrated with language models, etc. But it's definitely like not cart before the horse, just making sure that we're able to have this organization of the material first, or is there some, or what?
I'm more than happy to have input from people. I think there's a lot that can be done with it. Question of getting the input and finding the time and effort to do it. So I'm fine with making it available as well as I can. I will send a new copy, updated copy to Peter. Might take me a little bit before I can do that. I usually create a new version and do some kind of a check to make sure there's no major problems with it. And the bigger it gets, the longer it takes to do the review.
I think that this, so on the one hand, this is all wonderful. I'm still optimistic. On the other hand, this is, and you described a very low bar there, Daniel, that's right, for the first step. But trying to proceed is very difficult. And because what we want is, on the one hand, the things like quotations and names and places and publications and things like that, that gives you the historical grounding. And then we want, at the other end, we want the principles and concepts of George's work and that kind of perspective. And getting from the one to the other is where the challenge lies. Finding the paths, the coherent paths that tie everything together, with, you know, worldviews and schools of thought and methods and you know, the people, the unifying language keeps that challenge. Wow.
If you start with a structure of the core principles and core concepts, pardon me, and then have linkages from each of those to aspects like in the collection that Tom has produced. So you could get to people, their terminology for concepts, their quotations, their works, and so forth. You basically start with the skeleton of the fundamentals of systems, and then use that to branch out. So if somebody is, for example, doing research on holarchy, and then wants to know, well, who all has contributed to concepts of holarchy, and what other kinds of concepts are related to holarchy, and so forth. So we could use this network that Tom has created, or something very much like it, but start with the core integration. Don't start with just trying to bring things together in some sort of non-principled way.
If you look at Tom's list of concepts, or the, you know, you'll see how, you know, there isn't one, you know, there, you know, not everybody agrees up to the left a little bit. No, it's, let's see. Yeah, down a little bit on the left. Concepts is up.
Up there.
And no, to the right there. So not everybody agrees on what the core concepts are. And there are, so they're conceptual structures and conceptual themes. And, you know, the question is, people have different bases that they will extract and say, this is the core concept structure. Now, what Tom has there with concept views is maybe a way of saying we have this space of concepts, and then we have different viewpoints that will be that will extract certain conceptual structures as basic and the rest as derivative.
I'm not so sure you have to start with this idea of just a collection of things. That basically you can, it's like any engineering process. You start with a model of what it is you're trying to construct. And then as you go through and take each one of those and say, where does it fit in this fundamental model? So this is the struggle that's been going on forever, that people have all these different terminologies and conceptual frameworks and so on and so forth. And we just keep talking about all of them as if, well, we should somehow include this, we should somehow include this. We don't know how to do that inclusion.
Well, this is the root of the issue. And I think that, when you say fundamental model, one has to have an agreement about the fundamental model. And therein lies the problem, because you're not going to get that.
No,
Oh,
you don't. You start with one, you pick one, you say, this is the one we're going to start with. And like all of science, it develops and evolves and becomes better through the scientific method of testing whether or not this really works or not. But you don't just, continue this basic argument with yourself about, well, should we include this or should we not include this, or how are we going to do this? And saying that not everybody agrees is just not an excuse for not taking a step forward.
But that's not how it progresses, because you don't take a model, you don't take Newton's model of gravity and iterate it and get to general relativity. Because each model already has measurements and ontological assumptions and entitation. And
look, I'm not going to get into an argument about the scientific process. I'm simply stating that if you want to continue this conversation as, well, nobody agrees on all this stuff, so we don't know where to start, this is going to go on forever. That's all I'm going to say about it.
I don't think anybody said we don't know where to start. We said that that it's messy, that Tom has done a very good job of collecting sort of a mid-level. He's done a mid-level organization of the broad and messy, empirical content of systems fields, and that is a good place to start. That we want, ideally, we want to be able to extract fundamental models and say, here's how they all relate through this content. But on the other hand, starting from a fundamental model and ignoring the empirical content that he has collected from all of the smart people who have given a lot of thought to these things, and they have had their reasons for choosing the ideas that they've chosen as being the ones that they want to foreground. So everybody who has written about systems has foregrounded particular concepts and terminology and methods for the reasons that were important when they were doing this. So it wasn't that they weren't trying to be rigorous and relevant and robust. It's just that they were all coming from slightly different viewpoints, which is why I was saying, and we've talked to Dwayne Hybertson about this for years, about how the views and viewpoints framing is a way to work on the one hand with this somewhat messy collection of materials, and then say one can extract patterns, or one can show how these are patterns that come from different viewpoints, and that's why they have different preferences. But they're all looking basically at the same thing. Of course, this other elephant in the room is, what is the thing that they're looking at? We only know what the thing is that they're looking at from the fact that we have the records of all of their the views that they've gotten from their particular viewpoints.
I should mention that I always considered this a preliminary model that captured the information that I needed to build a better model, a second model. And it's the second model that George is referring to, where we try to determine how to describe it This is just amassing the information that's needed to do that.
Right.
So for example, I don't have a single specific definition of system. What I have is a collection of about 50 different definitions that people have put forward. So
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where one could start. I mean, to George's point, you know, I mean, he's got 12 principles, I think it is, in his book. So one could say, here's George's and his colleagues, you know, 12 principles, and here's a starting point. You could also argue, you know, you could come up with probably a half a dozen other names of people who have put forward various descriptions of their conception of what system science principles and ideas are. And one could, now whether ISSS needs to internally say we're going to adopt George's model as a starting point, or then Troncali's system process theories, or you know, Mike Jackson's SOSMs, or
John Kinnaman, or yeah.
or John Kinnaman, or anybody else. I mean, and that, I think that that's been the issue. Now, I do think we could follow up on what George is suggesting, and you know, whether it's all of us or George and some graduate students or whatever. I mean, it's accessing that material through these various points and looking for the areas of convergence. I mean, that's essentially what I've been struggling with from ocean literacy, and that, I mean, from systems literacy. And that's one other way of looking at this, is what are the key points that one should know if you graduate from high school. I mean, that's a kind of an outcome, tangible date and time, an age where there might be some focus potential based on, or in the USA, and that may be different than might be adopted in an indigenous population in the Pacific Islands who have a different sense of system, perhaps, or perhaps not. So in order to make a way forward, that those are some suggestions. I would.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just add a few notes from our work with ontology and some related projects. So first, Sumo. This is not our project, but we use it in active inference. Adam Peace has created an upper ontology that then maps to domain-specific mid-level ontologies and all the way down to WordNet and basically just everyday topics and entities. So like there are ways to and people could have a variant upper ontology, or new domains can be hot swapped and versioned as well. So I believe it is possible to have theoretical pluralism around like what are core the connectivity and the geometry of different concepts, while also, you know, de facto one in a certain setting might be most fit. So being able to articulate, for example, the George's textbook in a formal knowledge model and another book in a formal knowledge model, and us being able to like look at where there's alignment. And then closer to the work that we're doing, so this is an assertion based architecture. So ultimately everything is just an assertion. When you entered in the definition, or a link, you said you asserted that this is this field. So by including everything as assertions, we can interpret even large networks more rhetorically. And so just this author asserted that. And so it doesn't need to be about whether they were right or wrong. It doesn't need to be about who agrees with them even, but it gives us a better structure, we think, for and then the way that we're playing this out right now with this assertion based architecture for kind of like ontology mapping is using patterns and using different, we're focused on cognitive phenomena, cognitive security, but these are like library index cards, which is something, you know, similar to here, and that is mappable. And then like I think this system, even though it's implemented in Coda, and this system, if we can come to a understanding of what, I mean, we should be able to describe the properties in the schema just like you have, and see the current version of the system as just for what it is, and then also understand which features we want to have going forward, so it can be like updatable. I mean, a lot of these deeper discussions are relevant, but I mean, George, you've made your position that there's this many core concepts. I also think there are people who will say that there's a fewer or a different number. It's just going to be what it is, and I don't know if it's a persuasion situation more than it is just like a moving forward with what people actually use.
Yeah, I'd like to point out that I didn't call the book The Principles of System Science. I called it Principles of System Science, for the very reason that there's probably a lot more that could be added to it, but you've got to start somewhere. You can't just keep saying, well, so-and-so said this and so-and-so said this. They're very similar, and then we'll go on to the next topic and talk about what so-and-so said about this. You just have to get started somehow.
I mean, having the topic and then being able to say to assert that these are the principles and just I don't know if I'm already like thinking past it and looking back at the issue, but I think if we just had a more neutral syntax for claims and for all of these different types of entities, that then we'd be able to have this conversation more clearly. And as we've talked about in previous times, that there's like this historiosity and there's the timelessness, but it's like very, I don't know, it's tenuous to be thinking of the implications of the mappings without something that's more concrete in front of us.
Daniel, what would be, so you have done a lot of work with CODA and are very happy with it. And should we all shift to working in CODA? Is that, do you think that would be a robust way to
well, we've asked Jen. I've asked Jen to consider, creating and paying for the $30 a month for the ISSS to have CODA, because at the moment this is all on Danielle's account, which is great, but I mean, it's not on an ISSS account, and we need to have it within the domain of ISSS control. I mean, it's been great to get going like this, and Daniel can convert it all over. And I mean, I do think it has a number of features that we've come to like.
So what's the value proposition here, Daniel? For you, do you agree? Do you think that we should all shift to thinking in terms of CODA as a good enough common platform right now, so that we can be bringing things in? Would you recommend that?
Any common platform is better. This, at the very least, people can add their notes and references and links and things like that. Like, absent this, I'm not sure if there's any other shared repository. So at the very least, as collaborative note-taking, I have always encouraged people to add everything. Then for more sophisticated modeling, like we're doing here, it would have to be assessed, because basically it is a whole project to set it up and how things are connected to each other.
But there's a community of people who are working with CODA and developing APIs, and so that's all has a future that we can count on, because having been working in similar fields here, knowledge engineering, since before you were born, and I think several of us have been, it's always a fear of getting into a software cul-de-sac, which is less of a problem now that there's more standardization. It used to be a big issue where Microsoft was the big the evil empire, and the idea that they would lock you in and other people would try to lock you in. So I still have residual fear of getting into software cul-de-sacs. I think UML, which Tom has been working on, that took how long has it been since UML? Decades that the people have been working on unified
in the
modeling.
mid-90s when it came together.
Yeah, right. And that was like, good luck with that. You know, how are we going to get people to agree on unification like that? And the latest version of UML had a lot of input from INCOSE, the systems engineering community. When it first came out, it was not that popular with engineers, but I think now there's more hope. But people also object that as features are added, you know, I don't know, at least UML has critical mass. So I need to hear, you know, Daniel, your guidance, someone who's in touch more with what the current thinking is on where should the effort be invested for the hope, you know, for, as Peter said, for ISSS to make an investment of effort in something that we can expect to be standardized and evolved.
Yes. So I totally hear you on this, and we're not going to address it in several minutes, but it's good to service it. I too am concerned about any browser-based, you know, non-trivially exportable system. So I am not saying that code is the best for knowledge systems, but in terms of mockups, we've never seen anything better. It's possible to design systems that through APIs there can be a database, and Coda can be more like the front end for displaying a database that could be UML or otherwise. Seeing a small UML export would help me understand the scheme used here, but that's not necessarily the best scheme. So
well, that's a place to start.
Yeah,
Working
but
with
seeing the UML and then doing research and trying to understand if there's a how we could use, for example, a Git-based repository for versioning UML documents, and then have multiple render opportunities, multiple simulation and rendering opportunities from a UML schema. And then there could be an ISSS maintained schema, and people can make merge and pull requests, and people can fork it and comment on the code and things like that. So I think we can start to sketch that kind of knowledge. I mean, that is knowledge engineering.
Yeah, this is so important. It's been such an obstacle to making progress on this.
I think that there's two parallel things going on here, as usual. Knowledge and engineering. So we're talking about the engineering of that knowledge, and then people like Tom and maybe the SCA as well are working on the knowledge and the content. And as long as that knowledge and content is convertible and transposable into multiple potentially formats or representations, then you know, we're building it to be scalable for the future.
Yeah.
But as Daniel pointed out, you know, the ability to see George's work juxtaposed against someone else's synthesis, you know, the tool makes a difference, because we're, as Warfield kept pointing out, you know, we're dealing with our cognitive limitations, and we can't, you know, we can't see the patterns the way we can if we're doing it in a computer-assisted way. So using the right tools helps us get beyond, you know, individual effort, and to be able to, you know, get to another plateau of seeing the seeing the knowledge patterns and seeing how the similarities and differences, and then synthesizing across individual efforts.
Yeah, it just makes me think of two people imagining a mural in their head, and then they're trying to talk through language, versus we could have the mural external, and then people can still have their viewpoints and perspectives, but there's something to actually externalize the conversation in a way that just speculative, communication it's not even in the same category of work.
Right. That was the whole logic behind Warfield's effort, coming from electrical engineering and seeing people failing in group decision making because they didn't have a common external referent. And he found that people would often say, well, I don't want to build a model that's larger than an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, because that's what the paper mandates. And he'd say, no, cover the whole, cover the wall. The models should determine what the model should be, and then you'll have it externalized and you'll be able to do group modeling. And so it's amazing that he was doing this, in the age that he was, and ahead of his time in a lot of ways. Unfortunately, a lot of his work was behind paywalls and did not really get appreciated. But leveraging the technology to facilitate the human interaction, that's also something that he was early on, and people didn't understand. I want to have face-to-face human interaction. And he said, but we need, because of our cognitive limitations, we need to have computer support in order to facilitate the human interaction. Anyway, just a little aside, I don't know how much Warfield's work and the structured dialogue stuff has come up, probably has come up in this education effort. But the idea of leveraging tools to get common reference so that we're all looking at something similar, and then we can say whatever your points are.
Yeah, the holographic screen can only contain classical information, and then the diverse cognitive agents perform the quantum rotation. I think this is where we're coming to see it from cognitive science, and so it's not too early to design the knowledge systems that enable it. Well, interesting on this topic. Tom, if you can send me a sample UML whenever, or have access to the snapshot so I can just understand and describe the schema. And then I think it sounds like in knowledge engineering we'll have kind of like a library sciences division based upon the records and the archival work, like the archival triaging, and then a more of a systems engineering of knowledge engineering systems angle as we start to think about how we can make that repository or process and system effective and adaptive. Library and research unit or something, but with Rob and the SCA, make sure that we don't let it fall between the cracks to archive everything and to incrementally proceed with the bibliographic information of everything first, and then the depth and the full texts and all of this where possible. But then all of that library style work. And then here we can start to think about which knowledge infrastructure is gonna be what we need. All right. Well, thank you all for joining, and any Thursday you're always welcome, or email education@ISSS.org or just edit the coda directly, and we'll try to proceed on this as we can.
Okay. Bye-bye. Very good.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
All right.